Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither, they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. Jai, Guru, Deva, Om. Nothing's going to change my world. Nothing's going to change my world. Images of broken light, which dance before me like a million eyes. They call me on and on across the universe. Thoughts meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox. They tumble blindly as they make their way across the universe. Jai Guru Deva Om. Nothing's going to change my world. Nothing's going to change my world. Cheers. Soldier Skål. Bottoms up. Across the universe. Where's that? It's a great quote in here. Do you know this book? The Lennon Remembers Rolling Stone interviews, 1970. Here we are. It's one of the best lyrics I've written. In fact, it could be the best. It's good poetry, see. I like the ones that can stand as poetry without melody. Yeah. It does, doesn't it? It really does. The melody that John came up with for this song was fabulous. But it does stand as is it John's most poetic song? Yeah, I think it is. I love the poetry of I Am the Walrus. You know, there's many others, but yeah, Lucy in the Sky. This is the Playboy interviews that John did. September 1980 came out in Playboy magazine just around Christmas, just about the time John was murdered in December 1980. I remember it being on the newsstands. Or was it just before? And this, what did he say here? It was obviously in his mind that he said, the Beatles didn't make a good version of Across the Universe. I think subconsciously I think Paul would subconsciously try and destroy a great song. And then he goes on to say that they did kind of detailed cleaning up, of Paul's songs. But when it came to his, like Strawberry Fields, he cites, and this one, there was an air of kind of looseness, that casualness and experimentation crept in. And he says, a lousy track of a great song. He does go on to say that Phil Spector kind of dug the song out again later, as he did for Let It Be, because this was February. Across the Universe was February 1968. So Let It Be, of course, came out. The album came out 2 years later, didn't it? Though Phil Spector was apparently still mixing one of the last things they did with the Beatles album, if I've got this right. I think it was the 1st of April 1970. Phil Spector was mixing what he saw as improving that February 1968 mix of Across the Universe, because it's the only time it was ever done. Isn't that strange? I know it's in the Let It Be film, isn't it? It's in Let It Be, but it's rehearsing it in the studio, and they didn't record it. It was rehearsing it, so it wasn't like a mono recording in the studio, but didn't actually bother to record it again when they came to record it in the Apple Studio, Savile Row. Strange, isn't it? You know, um, it's a great song, isn't it? I mean, the background, of course, it's they're just on the cusp of going to India, aren't they? In February 1968, and I think they wanted to put a single out to sort of cover it. You know, while they were going to be away for what was it, a month or two, and a single was going to be put out. And Paul had Lady Madonna. There was also George's The Inner Light floating around, and John had this one, which he said he wrote after a late night argument, or sort of with Cynthia when they were at Weybridge, and he got up and heard her voice going round in his mind, and words are flowing out, etc. And he says he couldn't sleep till he got this down. It was like he was possessed, like a medium. He had to go and write it all down. It was like, guiding him. And it turned out to be not a negative song about an argument, but a very positive song about a journey across the universe into spiritual enlightenment. And of course, the Beatles had met Maharishi in 1967. They'd gone off to Bangor in North Wales in August, just before Brian died, wasn't it? End of August 1967. And then they were obviously all into that. And then they were going to go and they'd made arrangements to go to Maharishi's ashram the beginning of the following year. They were also thinking about Yellow Submarine, the animated thing, that they needed some songs for it. I think Paul and George had come up with the songs like, All Together Now, and It's Only a Northern Song, It's All Too Much. But John had this song too, which hadn't seen the light of day yet, which was recorded about that time, I think, February 68. Another great song, isn't it? Across, Hey Bulldog. And they were both neglected songs, weren't they? Both Hey Bulldog was neglected. Ended up being in Yellow Submarine, but not only in the European UK print, not in America. It was cut out. It didn't really get. It was a bit sort of. Is Paul being, is John being a bit neurotic, blaming Paul for this? Paul's great. I love Paul. To me, he's like a musical god, as I said before. But was he a bit overpowering? You always think Lennon being the sort of leader of the group, but Paul's in charge, isn't he? Particularly after Brian died. Not taking anything away from Paul. In fact, the Beatles would not have probably done any albums at all were it not for him. He was the guiding force, really, in some ways after Brian died. Would that be fair to say? But I think it just shows how sort of vulnerable and a bit neurotic John was, that he had to rely on Paul's say so. And if they worked on a song, if that's true, subconscious sabotage. Not giving John's songs, and presumably George's as well, enough prominence. But he was. We do hear that during the Get Back sessions. How many times is Get Back itself hammered out, isn't it? Again and again. Yeah, it did seem during the Get Back sessions, endless sort of, and Maxwell Silver Hammer, how many times that gets hammered out, whereas John's songs, some nice little ones, aren't they? Case of the Blues and, Watching Rainbows, they seem to get lost. And I mean, John was his own worst enemy a bit, I think, because he didn't have much interest in the band. Is that fair to say? A lot of these songs went by the way, and though he criticises Paul in this, he perhaps was his own worst enemy. That's perhaps the reason that there isn't a good version of the song. Is there not a good version of the song? I've been listening to, just before I came here, I've been listening to all the available versions of Across the Universe. And say that all of them from that February 1968 session at Abbey Road. The only one is a bit of clips of at Twickenham, jamming away at it. And, of course, that wasn't a recording, that was just filming and doing it. It's interesting though, isn't it? And why wasn't it a single in February 1968? Lady Madonna. It's going to sound like I'm having a go at Paul. Lady Madonna is not a favourite of mine. It's got it's got a great sort of bass line, a great riff, but that kind of does grate on me a little bit. It's not my favourite Beatles. It's probably my least favourite Beatles single. Could it have not been a double A side? Lady Madonna, Across the Universe. Wow, what do you think of that? Of course, the Beatles only did 2 singles in 1968. That's a bit weird, isn't it? Of course, much later on in the year, Hey Jude came out, Revolution. Was that the least singles they did over? They had quite a few in 1967 and 66, 65. Yeah, I think 69 they had more too. But I think John didn't have confidence in that song. They recorded it quite a few times, and I think he was a little bit, would this be fair to say, not keen on his voice. He was often asking them to overdub his voice, wasn't he? And this went on and on, didn't it? You know, for a long time afterwards, he was always a bit neurotic about his voice. And this voice is very sort of ethereal, the way he's doing it. I read one critic said it was sounding a bit babyish, and that's unfair. I think he wanted to sing it. He had a great voice singing that at those levels. You know, I think John had a really good singing voice, actually. I don't think he needed to have worried about, you know, but he did, you know. And bless him, you know, you can't, I know myself, if you worry about something, no matter what anybody else says to you, you're not going to really take it on board if you've convinced yourself something, are you? So anyway, it didn't go out. I didn't see the light of day until Spike Milligan was apparently came into the studio, and we heard the song and wanted to put this album together for the World Wildlife Fund, like a charity album, and he asked if he could put it on, and it eventually did, but it didn't come out until December 1969. It's a long, long time, you know. And then I think it was mooted for a Yellow Submarine EP. The Yellow Submarine movie came out in England, in Europe, I think, in was it July? I can't remember now. I don't think it came out in America till end of the year, November 68. And of course, Across the Universe is not in it. And then I remember reading in Mark Lewison's Sessions book, there's an EP made up of all the songs, you know, the original songs, and Across the Universe was going to be on that, but it didn't materialize. What happened, of course, was George, you know, the soundtrack was, the A side was just those original songs, 4 of them, and then the B side came out. I think, when did the soundtrack album come out? Just early 69, wasn't it? About January 69, is that right? This was quite a bit after the movie came out. Right. It was kept back because of the White Album, wasn't it, coming out just before Christmas in '68. The White Album kind of did for it in a way. So the World Wildlife Fund album came out December '69. Had people like Cilla Black on it, and of course the reason why it got neglected in '68 was because of all those wealth of songs that they came back from India with, didn't they? They came back with some wonderful songs, didn't they, from India? So it got pushed back on the back burner, didn't it? Completely pushed back. But John hadn't forgotten it and dug it out again during the Twickenham rehearsals. They worked on it, but it didn't go any further. Of course, for the World Wildlife Fund, they'd added all these bird sound effects on it, hadn't they? And they apparently speeded up John's voice a little bit. So his vocal on that sounds really not good at all. What was the first version of Across the Universe you heard? I think, yeah, the first version of Across the Universe I heard was on Let It Be. I didn't hear the World Wildlife Fund version of it. And there was an album called Rarities, and it came with originally the box set of the Beatles albums in this country in the late 70s. And also, it was on this. It was on the Beatles ballads, that great compilation album that came out UK Europe only. I think September 1980. Yeah. So, but yeah, definitely the first version of Across the Universe I heard was the version on Let It Be that Phil Spector had. But of course, it's the same. It is the same source material as all the others. February '68. Was it the 4th of February? Something like that. They didn't record it again. Why didn't he record it again? All the debacle over Get Back, Let It Be, and the album that came out. And I think Glyn Johns got hold of it and kind of got rid of the bird sound effects. And of course, what I haven't said in that February '68 recording was there were two girls, wasn't there? One called Lizzie Bravo from Brazil, who's on something, isn't she? She still does things. I can't remember the other girl's name. They were pulled out from the outside Abbey Road. They came on to do harmonies. I think John had a bit of a go about that too, saying they should have got a choir rather than just two girls off the street doing harmonies. And then Phil, as I say, the last ever time anybody was in the studio working on a Beatles album, I think of all the Beatles, only Ringo was there doing drums to the orchestrations, because Phil had got an orchestra. Was behaving characteristically weirdly, but put the orchestrations, and the orchestrations are good. It's what I don't like. It's the choirs of angels. It sounds a bit funereal. Do you find that? I talked about, didn't I, last time I was here, about A Long and Winding Road. They're not really being a perfect version of that. They're not as bad as, yeah. I like it, kind of like what he's done with it, and John's voice sounds better. Did he slow it down? He slowed, particularly on the remix version that came out in 2021. His voice sounds really good. But there is really no great version of it. If I'm going to be pushed, yeah. Later on, of course, we had on the anthology too. A highlight for me was the what they call the psychedelic version of it, which you can hear the tambura and you can hear it's a really good vocal, clean as well, and not speeded up. If I was going to be pushed, that's my favourite version of it, the one on Anthology 2. And then a version of it came out, another February '68. Of course, they're all February '68 versions, all of them. Came out on the White Album Super Deluxe, and that was very sparse. Good. And of course, there was a version on that. I've slagged this off before as being what I think is a pointless Beatles album, Let It Be Naked. And apparently they digitally adjusted John's voice in that. It's just, oh, no. Anyway, so yeah, Across the Universe. What a beautiful song. And it's really sad to say this, but I do believe that John, had he not been murdered, he would have come and done a tour over here. I think he'd have dug that song out and done it again, and it would have been a definitive great version of it. But it wasn't to be, was it? But bless him, it's a wonderful song. It's there, as I say, my version is the favourite version on Anthology 2. The version on Let It Be is good. Just don't quite like the choirs of angels. But at the time, it was probably the best recorded version of it. Was John right to be blaming Paul? Well, it just shows how much he valued Paul, didn't it, really? At the end of the day, he really valued him, his advice, and yeah, Paul's in charge. Yeah. Thanks for listening to me. Bless you. Will I see you again? I sincerely hope so.